I'd like to take the opportunity today to talk a little bit about venture investing, not only for how I see it going forward, some of the trends that are happening today, but maybe take you back as to how venture started in the United States, which I think is instructive as Russia starts to move in a similar direction. First of all, venture capital really began without the name or the nomenclature back in the early 1900s, in which wealthy families had a subsection, a small part of their assets, which they gave to managers to start up new businesses. The Rockefellers, all of the wealthy people at that time had a venture arm to their investment strategy, and it wound up creating almost all of the industry in the United States. In fact, today we talk about venture-backed companies representing a large part of the economy, 20% or so. You could probably argue, if you went all the way back to those times, that it was almost 90% of the company formations were backed by early venture people. Venture capital then became somewhat formalized with American Research and Development, an institutionalization of the venture process in which there were multiple investors run by a man named General Dorio. I was lucky enough to meet General Dorio late in his career. He was a professor at the Harvard Business School. I took a course called, I think it was strategic manufacturing. Some high-level name, but essentially what he had us all do is do his due diligence for his next deal. So we went around all these different scientific labs, different places, making marketing estimates, and he would make investments. It was his success that really started the venture process. He invested in a computer company, and had a 1,200 times return. That time, a big exit, $355 million. The government began to get the message as to what could be done with a venture kind of activity. And accordingly, they did a number of things. First of all, they set up the Small Business Administration to help foster the starting of new companies. So the government helped in the beginning, much like Rusnanotech is beginning to create the engine of innovation in Russia. Later on, a couple what seemingly were irrelevant acts, but turned out to be extremely positive for venture capital, transpired. And that is that prior to 1974, the large pension funds were prohibited from making very risky investments. In the Act of 1974, enabled them to do it with a minority, a small part of their assets, but still a small part of huge pools of capital added tremendous amounts of capability in the venture industry. Shortly thereafter was the advent of capital gains tax, so that you were taxed on your gains in building businesses at only half the tax rate, the normal tax rate. And that spawned a whole number of companies, including Apple, Genentech, Intel, Yahoo, FedEx, companies really important to the growth of the United States. Here's a little snapshot of what the contribution of venture capital has been to the U.S. economy. That first line is actually it's incorrect. The venture-backed revenue accounts for about 21%. This is in 2010. 21% of the gross national product in the United States. In contrast, the amount of spending by venture capitalists is about 0.2% of GNP. So you're talking about a very small amount of money levered up in terms of its effect on GDP. The other thing that we're proud of as an industry is the creation of jobs representing approximately 11% of the private sector. So I've often said one of the great things venture capital is we can create jobs faster than the Fortune 500 is losing them. And that's been a source of some pride to all of us in this industry. Let me talk a little bit about life science ventures. Later, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the history, because it's pretty rich. So, one of the strategies that we've employed at Domain is to target unmet medical needs. Many of the pharmaceutical companies, although that's changing, look at improving medicine incrementally. So taking a drug that may be good for lowering blood pressure and improving on it to make it safer or more effective. In the venture-backed approach, we're looking at whole new areas, whole new unmet needs. Give you an example of some of the tactics we use. We have something called Disease Days, where we'll fly people in from all over the world to talk about a specific disease where we think there's a big unmet need. So we had a day in obesity, we had a day with pain, more recently a day with Alzheimer's, and we wound up usually doing a number of deals by affirmatively going out, looking at a disease area rather than looking at deal flow coming in. So one example is a company called Synexa, which we started from nothing in the Alzheimer's disease area. My partner, Eckhart Weber, will talk about this more tomorrow in detail, but essentially the group of scientists that we brought in talked about a new pathway to reduce the morbidity associated with Alzheimer's disease, and that is now in advanced clinical trials. It looks like it not only improves the symptoms, which would be good enough, but may even be disease-modifying. Syndex is another example of a completely different approach in cancer. In cancer, as cells become damaged with chemotherapy, there's an enzyme called PARP that comes in and repairs the DNA of those cancer cells. So if there's a way that you can stop the repair, you can more effectively deliver chemotherapy. And that's what Syndex is doing. A second strategy is what we call fail fast. So obviously when you invest in a venture, the number one thing that you want is success. In my opinion, the second best thing that can happen from success is to fail fast on a small amount of money. So we take the position, and once we come up with a hypothesis of a new therapeutic modality, we then try to figure out a strategy to spend the least amount of money and take the shortest amount of time to prove that we're wrong. There are two examples. We had a device to treat Alzheimer's disease that looked very promising. We set out a trial that would show futility. So if in fact it demonstrated futility, we knew that we could stop it altogether rather than looking at, well, we have new insights, let's try this, let's try that, something new. Decided we will shut down the company if it doesn't work. In both of these situations here, the product did not work, but we were able to cut our losses by addressing it quite early and hard. Many other processes use one where they're trying to incrementally improve something rather than go for the heart of the matter. Another obvious strategy is leveraging existing technologies to apply them to healthcare. So one of our companies, NeuroPace, is involved in epilepsy. It is clear to everybody that there's a certain pattern of brainwave prior to an epileptic having a major seizure or problem, and that can be detected electronically. So prior, however, to miniaturization, which was not done for healthcare, but electronic miniaturization done for cell phones, other industries, there was really no way to handle that. Now there's an implantable device for epileptics that can be reading the brain waves constantly, and if they find an aberrant brain wave, can shock it back to normal. It's a way to actually solve a problem without using drugs. Most of the drugs used in epilepsy are ineffective. They're probably effective 50, 60% of the time, in addition to which they can have significant side effects. So there are lots of examples where we're leveraging already existing technologies. Another one is in insulin pumps for diabetics. And then another approach is to use new technology for old approaches. For example, it's been known for a long time that one of the mechanisms of hypertension, extremely high blood pressure, could be handled with surgically. Of course, it's a rather heroic way to handle hypertension, but today our company, Kona, has come up with a way to do the same surgery, but on a highly less invasive manner. Similarly with Corthera for heart failure. So this is Kona and Corthera. Lastly, this is used less frequently, but we still think it has a place in biotech, and that is looking at whole new approaches to medicine that may form a platform that has applicability over a number of therapeutic areas. Adenix is targeted at pain. There are many. It's a very early stage company. There are many pathways that they're working on associated with pain, which is a major unmet need, as most of you would imagine. ATAR, a new company that has discovered a new class of human proteins that may have impact on multiple diseases. So what has been the productivity of venture-backed companies? A lot of people say, well, obviously, how are you doing? This is a study that was done a few years ago by Lehman Brothers, showing that approximately 2% of the spending globally in research and development is done by venture-backed companies. Despite the fact, if you look at the chart all the way on the right, about 67% of the world's clinical pipeline comes from that 2% R&D effort. We can all speculate on why that is. I have my own theories on why that's happening, but it does show that the venture-backed, highly focused company that is looking to, with heavy incentives to win, is winning in the drug development race. These charts show similar things, showing the pharmaceutical companies now, in response to a certain extent to this lack of productivity, are downsizing, and earnings growth is declining. Once again, showing the productivity of small companies. We do face some significant challenges going forward. The financial and regulatory situation has become increasingly complex. Sarbanes-Oxley is an example, so that taking a company public, going through an IPO process, is becoming increasingly problematic. Food and Drug Administration, there's been a major emphasis on safety, really to the detriment of getting new drugs approved. We're starting to see in recent months some changes to that end, with the FDA looking now and actually developing affirmative programs for innovation. Pharma downturn and U.S. healthcare reform also represent risks going forward. So many of us are not really running away from the U.S. market or the American market, but running to the emerging growth markets. Russia, of course, being one that's particularly attractive from our perspective, and we've looked at it fairly carefully. So the growth in major developed countries is flattening, whereas the emerging countries are growing at a 15 to 20% rate. The U.S. still remains the largest single market, but China is quickly coming up and will be replacing Japan shortly as the largest. So, one of the things I wanted to address is some of the environmental factors that are driving success in Silicon Valley. I think it's interesting that Silicon Valley, there are 40,000 professionals of Russian descent and 4,000 to 5,000 PhDs. So there's no shortage of Russian engineering technical background. And I'm certain that an even larger, obviously a larger percentage resides within Russia. The issue is what other factors are there that are having an impact on the development of venture-backed companies. So let me discuss that in a minute. Let me just ask you, and I think this is emblematic of the situation, how many people know who Steve Jobs is? Okay, that's mostly everyone. How many know Alan Kay? There's one person. You'll see if I get this right. But Alan Kay essentially developed Windows, the mouse, the concept of a personal computer interfacing with the internet, and worked at Palo Alto Labs, where Steve Jobs kind of hung around a lot. And it's Steve who, with his entrepreneurial instinct, saw the applicability of this technology to the consumer and really made it happen. And I think that there is no question in my mind that you can't develop successful companies without the great scientists and great engineers behind it, but it's going to need entrepreneurs and a venture environment in order to make it happen. Factors that I think are important to that environment are a number of role models where you see successes like Genentech, which then spawned all kinds of other biotech companies. A network of support people, lawyers, accountants, etc., that work with the industry, that understand it, and are very supportive. Need local, state, and federal government backing, as we're showing with the effective tax systems and regulatory structures that kind of build on the capability. And you really need to develop a cultural attitude that failure is not a personal negative. So Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate with what we'd like to have happen, but if you kind of revel in your successes, and by the same process, if you were able to make something fail quickly, there are more ideas and there are good people, you can move from there. As you can see, Silicon Valley is about 30,000 Russian professionals last year and 4,000 PhDs. So there are a tremendous number of opportunities in life sciences. I think that there's a concern with the economic downturn that things haven't been as good as they were in the past. But I think that with the advent of new technologies, new applications, it's really better than I've ever seen it in terms of the opportunity. Lastly, on a more personal note, I was thinking about it coming here. I actually came from Shanghai yesterday, and on the plane, and it was about a year and a half ago when I first came to Russia. It was the first venture capital meeting, and at that time I was after a series of meetings culminating in a meeting with the president that I was really struck with the way the Russians were approaching the situation, and it quite in distinction to the Chinese in a way. China represents a great opportunity. I believe Russia, of course, also presents a great opportunity. But one of the things I found about the almost everybody uniformly was the straight talking, admitting where there were problems, and facing those problems and systematically working on it. I remember meeting at the President's house, which I was certain was going to be a 10-minute perfunctory, thank you very much for coming, would you like a cup of coffee, you know, time to go, my next appointment. And Medvedev literally spent almost 2 hours with us talking about real down-to-earth issues and problems. Subsequent to that, I've been here 4 or 5 times, had the opportunity to see St. Petersburg. I've been out in the countryside a number of times, and it really, all this candor, openness is really reflected in the people. So I love coming back here. My Russian is still very poor, but I've come to the conclusion, Я люблю Россию. Thank you very much. Спасибо.